Hello and welcome to our Week 6 NFL preview. I'm Maria Taylor alongside Tony Dungy and Mike Florio. And Tony, because Mike is here on the call, I feel like we have to start with the Vikings. Is that fair? Is that okay?
That is okay. We've got to talk Vikings.
Okay, so let's start with Minnesota, Mr. Florio, and what you're watching in their game against the Panthers.
Maria, you haven't been here nearly long enough to have figured out my long-standing suffering as a Vikings fan. The only good years were when Coach Dungy was the defensive coordinator. And I kept waiting after that for him to come back as the head coach someday, but it never happened. Maybe it still could. But I doubt that will occur. The Vikings and the Panthers this week, and I'm stunned that the Vikings are favored to win this game, even if it's only by a point. The Panthers had been very good. They've stumbled a little bit. It was difficult for them in Dallas. They had the Eagles beaten. They had that game in their grasp. They just didn't score enough points to hold off the onslaught by the Eagles. The Vikings, to me, though, have been extremely inconsistent defensively and offensively. They haven't been scoring enough points lately. I really look at this as a game. After the Vikings last week, we saw them collapse and then somehow steal that victory. They could pivot that towards something positive. They could get Dalvin Cook back this week. They need him. Their passing game has been good. The Panthers seem a little bit wounded to me. I'm holding out hope that the Vikings can get to 3-3. That's not the fan talking. The fan in me, trust me, has recovered. And with every disappointing Viking season, that fan recovers a little bit more. But, Coach, I think this is one where the Vikings can prove to us that maybe they're better than their record would suggest.
I think, Mike, for me, it is both teams. Who are you really? Minnesota doesn't have a sterling record, but a Dalvin Cook fumble against Cincinnati that was very questionable. They could have won that game. Missed field goal against Arizona. They could have won that game. But as you say, last week, they easily could have lost to the Giants. So who are you? And we need to see that. On the other side of the coin, Carolina, they're the same way. When Christian McCaffrey plays, they seem like they're a dynamic offense. They've got a lot of things going. Their defense is aggressive. When Christian McCaffrey doesn't play, we don't see that same thing from either side of the ball. So I'm anxious to see which team shows up on both sides of the ball. I think it could be a great game if they both play their A game.
You're right, Coach. Remember, the Panthers, they started the season 3-0. All of the hopes were high, and we saw Sam Darnold playing really well. So the question will be whether or not they can get a win against the Vikings. Let's move on to 2 4-1 teams. We've got the Chargers and we've got the Ravens. And remember, Baltimore coming off a Monday night game. We saw Lamar Jackson playing really well, actually one of his best games throwing the ball. So let's walk through what you need to see maybe from the Ravens in a game against the Chargers where we're going to see a lot of offense from that LA Chargers team, Coach.
I want to see some defense. I went into the season with both of these teams feeling like, hey, these teams are top 10 defensive teams. And last week, there's probably 1,400 yards between them of what they've given up, and we don't expect to see that. So who is going to be able to get a stop on these dynamic quarterbacks? And is this going to be a 47-45 type of game? It's going to be exciting. These quarterbacks are both on fire, but somewhere defensively, one of these teams has to stand up and get going and be the team we thought they would be.
And the thing about the Ravens, I was so impressed with what they did on Monday night, down 19 points in the second half. The passing numbers for Lamar Jackson in the second half were through the roof. And, I said earlier this week to Chris Sims, it was kind of like the person who's trying to figure out how to drive stick shift, and then it finally clicks when you get that feel of the clutch and it's just right. By necessity, Lamar Jackson and the Ravens offense figured out how to drive a stick shift in the second half of that Colts game. And they threw and they threw and they threw well. And it makes me wonder, is that the moment where the offense truly becomes as balanced as they need it to be? Because if they could ever become balanced between the pass and the run and can do either if one is taken away, that's when they become very dangerous. And the thing about the Chargers, they've been very good all year, but they've had some close calls. The Ravens have had some close calls. I think it's one of those games where it's going to be close, it's going to go down to the wire, and the Ravens have just proven over and over again that they can just find a way, some way, somehow, get in field goal range, trot out Justin Tucker, and walk off with a win. I feel like that's the way this is going to go, but this is a great game that could go either way, and also the start of potentially, we keep looking for that next great quarterback rivalry. Justin Herbert against Lamar Jackson. This is the first time they're ever going to meet. This is something we could see time and again, year in and year out, and hopefully we see it in the playoffs. That's how these rivalries really become special. But that rivalry is one to keep an eye on.
Florio, can I just say that I really appreciate the stick shift reference? That was my first car. Okay, it was a 5-speed, so it's really difficult to put it in gear. I totally understand that. But with Lamar Jackson coming off of throwing for 442 yards, Coach, if you were scheming up a defense, how would you defend against him, considering everything that we've seen from him so far this season?
Well, I'm telling you, and as Mike said, that one really scares you if you're a defensive coordinator, because I look at the Colts. They stopped the running game from Baltimore. They, for the most part, as well as you can do it, kept Lamar Jackson in the pocket. And they gave up over 500 yards. So now I don't know how you play these guys, because I don't know. You have to load up the box against the run. And if Lamar Jackson is going to throw like that from the pocket week in and week out, they're going to be extremely difficult to stop.
And we've talked plenty about Lamar Jackson, but go ahead, Mike. I was going to say Justin Herbert, what we've seen from him too.
And Herbert's just been spectacular from the moment that he first played week 2 against the Chiefs last year, after Tyrod Taylor had the unfortunate needle to the rib cage that made it through to his lung. But with Lamar Jackson, one thing that really amazed me the other night when you go back and watch what he did, he's throwing with a confidence that it is sustained. It's not sporadic. And he's got the sidearm throw, and he's doing different things, and he's doing it from the pocket. And I think that's what makes him even more dangerous. And Herbert's really from the pocket every bit as dangerous, if not one of the best quarterbacks right now in the NFL, Coach. Throwing in the pocket, the accuracy, the velocity, the touch, the various angles to the throws, everything you could ask for in a quarterback, Justin Herbert has that.
Yeah, Maria talked about, this maybe the next great rivalry, and, what we're seeing from these quarterbacks. Lamar Jackson has been great moving around, making plays, and now he's throwing from the pocket. Justin Herbert throwing from the pocket, as you mentioned, but able to make plays outside. These guys can do both, and they can hurt you. You take one away, they can do the other thing, and that's what makes them unique.
Well, since we're talking about quarterbacks, I feel like the only natural place to go is the Arizona Cardinals, the only remaining undefeated team in the NFL. Kyler Murray, and what we've been able to see from him and the entire offense. They're taking on the Browns this week. If you had to write a headline for this matchup, Mr. Florio, it would be what?
Well, it would be Reunion 2.0 for Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray. It's the second time they've faced off. And because of this new quirk in the schedule, they get together 2 years after they did. Usually it would be once every 4 years, but this is the 17th game for both teams, and they're back together again. The weather in Cleveland should be okay for Arizona. I thought maybe it would get a little sloppy in the afternoon, but I think they'll be fine. But Kyler Murray's banged up. He's got the shoulder injury. They're not going to have Chandler Jones most likely. He's on the COVID reserve list. They're not going to have their starting center in Rodney Hudson, who's really galvanized that line. But Kyler got the better of Baker in 2019 when the Browns kind of dipped. This one has some urgency in my mind for the Browns, because they're better than 3-2. You had a Bears team out there that's 3-2, and it's like, how are they 3-2? They feel like they're 1-4. And the Browns are 3-2, and it feels like they should be 4-1 or 5-0. And this is one where they really need to remind everyone that they're one of the short list Super Bowl contenders, and that defense had better do better, Coach, than allow 47 points like they did against the Chargers on Sunday.
No, you're right. Cleveland has to be disappointed. You have a double-digit lead in Arrowhead. You have a double-digit lead out in Los Angeles, and you lose those games. If I'm Myles Garrett and those defensive players, we've got to stand up. We've got to make something happen. We've got to go out there, and this is a tough task. This Arizona offense moves in multiple ways. They can give you problems a lot of ways. I think this is going to be another great matchup. And again, I want to see if this Cleveland defense can stand up and support the offense.
Yeah, I appreciate you always taking us to the defense, Coach, because when we talk about that game, and you kind of brought it up, Florio, but there are obviously tons of scoring on the board with the Browns and the Chargers, but they did have 532 total yards. They scored 42 points, 0 turnovers. And usually when you look at a stat line like that, you think that's instantly a win. So what are your thoughts on what we're seeing from the Browns offense? It's got to at least feel somewhat good. I know that there's no victories and a loss, but if there's a mild one, that your offense is playing really well, Coach.
No, they are. And I've been very, very impressed with Baker Mayfield, the way he's playing. He had one off week, not throwing the ball really well. But other than that, he's been under control, taking care of the football, spreading it around to a lot of people. He's very content when his two running backs get going. He doesn't feel like he's got to be in the limelight. He's got to create throws. These receivers are blocking downfield. Everybody's making plays. They got David Njoku involved last week, getting production out of the tight ends. They're playing great offense. And as Mike said, they're playing better than 3-2. So this is going to be a huge, huge game, big challenge, undefeated team where they need a win.
Let me just add one point. The Odell Beckham Jr. issue is very compelling and intriguing in Cleveland. He had 2 catches for 20 yards in that 42-point outburst. Chris Sims has studied the film and says this guy's open all the time. Baker Mayfield, for whatever reason, just isn't throwing it to him. OBJ is one of these guys I'm watching as the trade deadline approaches, because if the Browns aren't going to use this guy, that's a $14 million salary. They should just move on from it.
Coach, have you ever had a situation where a quarterback and a receiver, as great as they both are and as much success as they had, were not able to find the chemistry on the field? When you see something like that, what are the solutions, or are there ways to work through it?
I think you have to try to work through it, and you do work through it. Great players, they're going to produce. And Odell, I think, is ready to burst out. And it may happen this week. I'm sure Baker Mayfield is looking at the same tape Chris Sims is looking at and saying, you know, I've got to make sure he gets the ball. I know one thing. If Marvin Harrison went through a couple of stretches where he had 2 catches, that ball would be coming to him very, very soon and very often the next week.
You're going to find a way. Great players, you're going to put the ball in their hands, obviously. I can't let us leave without, we got to talk about the Bills and the Titans, mostly because I want to hear your post-game wrap-up of what we saw last week with the Bills going into Arrowhead, sustaining through what was the longest halftime I've ever seen. Coach, you did a great job. Florio, you did a great job. You guys are probably still talking through weather delays. But what was your takeaway from week 5 watching the Bills?
I was impressed with the Bills and the fact that they did exactly what they talked about doing. Offensively, they had to be sharp, not turn the ball over, take advantage of their opportunities in the red zone. They did that. They got Josh Allen running and made a big difference. So they had a nice game plan. Defensively, I don't think Leslie Frazier got enough credit for what he did. He told me he was going to have to stay patient. They were going to take away the deep ball. He thought his defensive front, by rotating around, playing 8 or 9 guys, keeping them fresh, they could chase down Mahomes, handle the run game. They did exactly that. They played outstanding ball. And we went through this when I was in Indianapolis. We kept coming up short against the Patriots. We kept coming up short. And then finally in 2005, we went into Foxborough and we beat them. And our confidence level at that point, we knew we had a championship team. And I think that's where Buffalo is now. Hey, we've kind of hit the last step and we got over it. Now look out, league, because we're tough. And this is going to be a challenge. They're going to face a completely different type of offense in Tennessee. But I think they're playing with a lot of confidence right now.
Hey, one thing about that weather delay, since we're peeling back the curtain just a little bit, for the first time in 12 years with NBC, and Coach, you may be able to relate to this, I had someone say to me multiple times, take your time when you're getting ready to say something. We never hear take your time.
Never.
So we talked really slowly on Sunday night to fill that hour, but that was a lot of fun. And it couldn't have been fun for the Bills in that cramped, tiny little locker room, which is one of the smallest in the league for the visiting team. They come back out, they establish themselves, they get the 18-point win. And, you know, you don't do that win justice if you fall down the next week. And I think what really helps the Bills on Monday night against the Titans, it was a year ago last night, Wednesday night, it was a Tuesday night game last year that they went to Tennessee and they got beat 42-16. So to the extent that anyone's got a big head in Buffalo after they beat the Chiefs, Sean McDermott can play the tape from last year and say, hey, well, you guys haven't done anything, and we're going back to play a team that kicked us around last year, I think that's going to help keep them focused and build on what they did. And they're the only dominant team in the NFL right now. They've won their last 4 games by a margin of more than 28 points. I don't see them slipping off and losing their focus.
And I got to admit to both of you guys, I went to Buffalo, interviewed Josh Allen, and when I walked away, I was like, I think I'm just a Bills believer now, because even as young as he is, and he's only 25, 26 years old, the confidence that he has in the team and the way that he views life. He was a farmer kind of growing up, so he's got this hard work ethic behind him and kind of a really down-to-earth guy. It seemed like he's the kind of leader you want, and obviously it's working out on the field as well. So from Josh Allen, a young quarterback who's playing really well, to a veteran quarterback who we're going to have on Sunday Night Football. But Mike Florio, we're not sure if we're actually going to see him. We don't know. Russell Wilson obviously was injured last week, and he's dealing with that finger injury. So let's just hear the latest from you, whether or not he's been at practice and what to expect this week on Sunday night.
Well, no practice as of Wednesday for Ben Roethlisberger, who's gotten pretty banged up so far this season. I fully expect primetime game, opportunity for the Steelers to get to 500. I think he'll find a way to be out there. And that Seahawks defense is so bad that even if he couldn't play for some reason, maybe with Mason Rudolph or Dwayne Haskins, they could still score enough points to overcome Geno Smith and what he's able to do. And look, Geno Smith was very impressive last week when he gets thrust into action with limited notice, a 98-yard drive right out of the gates. But now that the Steelers will have had a week to plan for Geno Smith, go back and study some old film and maybe try to figure out what they're going to expect, it won't be as easy for him. On the road, it won't be as easy either. So tall task for the Seahawks to avoid falling to 2-4. They were 5-0 last year. What a difference the year makes. They just need to hope that they can tread water while they wait for Russell Wilson. And that's not going to be easy, because even though the Steelers had those 3 ugly losses in a row, they got back on the right track against the Broncos. And that Seahawks defense on pace to give up more yards per game over the course of the full season than any team in league history.
Mike, you mentioned the Seahawks defense. I just actually finished taping a piece with Bobby Wagner, and he said that they have to get their communication, they have to get their togetherness back. And what he was worried about, even more so than Ben Roethlisberger, was the fact that the Steelers finally got their running game going and got that 147 yards rushing. He said, we cannot allow them to be two-dimensional. So they're going in with the focus of take the running game away first and make sure they do a good job. He also told me that Geno Smith has been very, very impressive all throughout training camp and the first part of the regular season, even when he wasn't playing. He said it was no surprise to them that he played well down the stretch last week, because that's what he had shown in practice and in the preseason. So they're going in very confident that they can move the ball and score points with Geno Smith.
And as a coach, you would probably understand what it's like to have to enter a game without your starting quarterback and re-scheme and having a week to actually prepare, Coach. What does that look like? Walk us through some of the preparation and what you're doing with your quarterback that's been preparing to be a second stringer the entire season.
Yeah, what you're doing is trying to shift your playbook. You've got 300 plays in there, and here's the 140 that Russell Wilson really does well and that are tailored to him. Well, what does Geno Smith do well? That's what we're going to emphasize now. So Pittsburgh realizes they may see some things that they've seen in the past. They may not. And so there's a little bit of an advantage for Seattle right now, because Pittsburgh really doesn't know. Last week what they saw, that was Russell Wilson's game plan. Even those last 20 plays that Geno was in, that was structured for Russell Wilson. What are they going to see that's structured for Geno Smith? That's what we'll find out Sunday night.
Well, we're going to find that out Sunday night, and you're going to hear from these lovely guys on Sunday night for Football Night in America. We'll see you at 7 Eastern. I'm going to go work on my stick shift, and Mr. Florio and Coach Dundee, I'll see you guys in Connecticut.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.